Chapter 2 of Contract, Voidable Contracts and Void Agreements. Section 10 to 30. All agreements are contract if they are made with the free consent of the party competent to contract for a lawful consideration and with a lawful object, not expressly declared to be void. Under Indian Contract Act, when does an agreement become a contract? It is enforceable by law. It is between the party competent to the contract. It is in the free consent of the party. Principle: a contract is an agreement enforceable by law. All agreements are contract if they are made with the free consent of party competent to contract for lawful consideration with a lawful object. If a 40-year-old businessman of the sound mind agreed to sell his bungalow worth of 40 lakh for 1 lakh, the agreement is valid. Valid as their lawful consideration, valid as A enter into in with free consent, valid because A has a capacity of the contract. A minor enter into an agreement representing himself to a major. Minor commit a fraud if the other party does not have a personal knowledge of his age. Doctrine of estoppel does not apply to the minor's case. Other party is entitled to get back the benefit passed to the minor if innocent about his age. Which one of the following is that essential component of the valid contract? Competency of the contractual capacity of the party. As a general principle of law, contract, which one of the following is not essential of the valid contract? Writing. According to the section 10 of the Contract Act, which one of the following is not essential to convert the agreement into a contract? Certainty of the term of the contract. Under the Indian Contract Act, a major agreement has the same consequences as to a truncated agreement. Competency or to the contract related to both age and soundness of the mind. A supplied to the necessity to the B. A minor. A can recover the payment of the estate to B. An agreement with the major is void ab initio. Both A and R are true, but R is not a correct explanation of A. E is of unsound mind. At a time of 1, he became a sound. Enter into contract with B. Contract is valid. A patient in a lunatic asylum who is interval of the sound mind may contract during intervals. A parent in a lunatic asylum who is interval of the sound mind may contract during the interval he of the sound mind. Mohiri Bivi versus Dharmodas Ghosh is a case relating to minor's contract. A minor contract is valid. Mortgage executed in the favor of minor is enforceable by him. Both A and R are true, and R is not a correct explanation of B. A contract with a minor is void contract. Mohiri Bibi versus Dharmodas Ghosh was finally decided by Privy Council. Under the Indian Contract Act, an agreement by heavily drunk person has the same consequences of a minor's agreement. The case of Mohiri Bibi versus Dharmodas Ghosh It's based on the provision of Indian Contract Act 1872 Section 11, which decision has laid down the principle that contract by minor is void ab initio. Mohiri vs. Dharmodas Ghosh. A. Know that the horse has a damaged hoof which he filled up by such a way that defeated defect and sold it to B. This defect has subsequently discovered by B. The act of A will amount to active concealment of the fact. The contract with the minor is void. According to the section 11 of the contract, a person is incompetent to contract who is minor, person of unsound mind, person disqualified for confiscating by any law. A contract entered into by a minor is void ab initio. Consider the following statement. A person is said to be sound mind for the purpose of making a contract if at a time of making contract he is capable of understanding it and of forming a rational judgment as it effect upon the interest. The term conscience ad Adam means to agree on the same thing with the same sense. The term conscience and Adam means meeting of mind together. For the binding of contract, both the party to the contract must be agree upon the same thing in the same sense. Consent will be said to be free when it is caused to be coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, and mistake. The term of free consent has been defined in which of the following section of the Contract Act? Section 14. Which provision of Indian Contract Act provide definition of free consent? Section 14. A consent is said to be free when it is not caused by coercion, undue influence, fraud. A consent obtained by threatening to commit a suicide amount to the consent of coercion. A threat to commit a suicide in performance of contract amount to coercion. A hold out of pistol over his own head and threatened to shoot himself if a release deed is not signed by his wife in the favor of his brother. A wife sign a release deed, the consent of the agreement caused by coercion. In the case, in order to release a fine of son, government attached the property of the father, and the son had to pay the payment of the sale of the property to the third party. The case come under coercion. The undue detention of the retaining to detain any person with the intention of causing any person to enter into an agreement would amount to which one of the following? Coercion. What is committing or threatening to commit any act forbidden by the IPC, or unlawful detaining or threatening to detain any property or prejudice or any person with intention of causing any person enter into the agreement is called coercion. Undue influence has been defined under section dash of the Indian Contract Act. 16. A guru, a spiritual advisor, induced a chela, his devotee, to gift him the whole of his property to secure benefit to his soul to the next world. the gift shall be voidable. A, a clause in a loan agreement permitting to financier a seize of finance a vehicle in the event of default of payment would not amount to void agreement due to unequal bargaining power. Which one of the following is not required to the undue influence? False statement by one of the parties. A person is deemed to be the position to the dominate the will of the another, where he holds the apparent authority over the other, where he holds the real authority over the other, where he make a contract with a person whose mental capacity is temporarily or permanently affected by the reason of age, illness, or mental and bodily distress. According to the section 16(1) of Indian Contract Act, a contract is said to be induced by undue influence where the dash is between the party are such that one of the party is in a position to dominate the will of the other and use that position to obtain the unfair advantages of the other. Relation subsisting. A master asks his servant to sell his bike to him at a place less than the market price. This contract can be avoided by the servant on the ground of undue influence. A contract which is validated the undue influence and declared as which one of the following by the Indian Contract Act voidable when it is the adequacy of the consideration taken into account of the court of law, when the fraud, coercion, and undue influence in the formation of the contract is pleaded. By the threat of suicide, A induces him, his wife, and a son executed a contract. What is according to the Indian Contract Act? A voidable contract. Which one of the following element is not required in the case of undue influence? The parties stand the near relation to each other. Which one of the following statement with regard to the factor violating the contract? A person is deemed to be in a position to determine the will of another where he stands the fiduciary relation to other, where the person who is in the position of dominate the will of another entered into a contract with him. The burden of proving that the consent was not induced by undue influence would always be upon person in the position of dominant will of the other. Parents shall always be deemed to be the position of dominant will of their children. Which one of the following agreement induced by undue influence? A. Enforceable of disease of age is induced by B. Influence over him medical attendance. To agree to pay B. an unreasonable sum of his professional service. Presumptions of undue influence can be raised in the case of relation of party being such that only party in the position to the dominant the will of the other. Which one of the following relation does not come within the undue influence of the relationship customer and shopkeeper? A contract is voidable if it is caused by concealment of the material fact. Someone who is under duty to speak because it is fraud. Which one of the following does not amount to the fraud? A representation made without knowing it to be false, honestly believing it to be true. B said to A, if you do not deny it, I shall I shall assume that the horse is sound. A say nothing. Here A silence is equivalent to speech. Section 17. Illustration is based on section 17. A said by an oxen to be a horse, which A know to be unsound. A say nothing to B about the horse's unsound. This will not fraud with A. A sell by auction to his daughter a horse which A know to be unsound. A says nothing to about the horse is unsound. This is fraud. A sell by an auction to B a horse which A know to be unsound. A say nothing to B about the horse unsoundness. This is none of the above. Which one of the following act is not amount to fraud within the meaning of section 17 of the act? None of the above. All amount to fraud. The active concealment of fact, one having knowledge or belief of the fact, a promise made without the intention of performing it, the suggestion as a fact that which is true by one who does believe it to be true. Which one of the following does not amount to fraud? The representation made without knowing it to be false, honestly believing it to be true. A sell by auction, B a horse which A know to be unsound. A say nothing about B, the horse of unsoundness. A does no fraud. A farmer whose crop is partially destroyed every year by cricketers read an advertisement of Adricia farm to save their crops from the manic of crickets, asking them to send rupees 5,000 for the machine to effectively kill crickets. A sent rupees 5,000 and received by mail one wooden block of hammer with instruction: put a cricket on the block and hammer it will certainly die. Repeat the performance till the cricketer are destroyed. A rightly alleges that contract is not binding on him, as his consent to purchase the machine with obtaining through fraud. A sell by auction to be a horse which A known to be unsound. Which one of the following situation amount to fraud? B daughter and has just come of the age. A remains silent, say nothing about his horse of unsoundness. Which one of the following is correct? In valid contract, there is an oral promise to compensate a person who is already voluntarily done something for the promisor. Inadequacy of consideration could be taken into account by court when the fraud is pleaded in the formation of the contract. A promise made without the intention of performing it amount to fraud. Under Indian Contract Act, which one of the following does not amount to fraud? False representation made without knowledge of the force. The Contract Act, mere silence is not fraud unless their duty to speak, the silence is deceptive, there is a change in the circumstances to be about the notice of party, an agreement in restraint of the marriage of any person other than minor is void. Consider the following statement: active concealment of fact, promise made without the intention of performing it. Which one of the following statement is correct? When a contract is caused by fraud and contract is voidable for inconception. Which one of the following is essential of misrepresentation? A statement made by defendant should relate it to the material fact. A. Take insurance policy on his life, making a false statement of his health. Does not disclose the fact that he was treated by serious illness. In this case, which one of the following statement is correct? Contract is voidable. Under Section 19 of Indian Contract Act, the consent caused by coercion is voidable. A contract which is formed without free consent, the party is void at the instant of the party whose consent is not free. When the consent to the contract is caused by coercion, the contract under Section 19 is voidable. Under Indian Contract Act, an agreement which is enforceable by law at the option of one or more of the party thereto, but not at the option of other and others, is voidable contract. Illegality renders a contract void. X enter into contact with Y, for which Y is guilty of fraud. X can set aside the contract and can recover damage also. Amar enter into contract with Suresh, for which Suresh is guilty of fraud. Amar can set aside the contract and recover the damage. An agreement made without free consent is voidable. When the consent of a party to a contract is caused by coercion, the contract is voidable at the option of parties whose consent is so caused. When both of the parties to the agreement are mistaken regarding fact, the agreement will be void. Where the consent of the both the party is given by mistake, the contract is void. Under Section 20 of Indian Contract Act 1872, in a case of both the party are under mistaken as to matter of fact, the contract is void. The nature of the agreement made under the provision of Section 20 of Indian Contract Act would be void. Where both parties are under mistaken as to the matter of fact, the agreement will be void. Both parties are mistaken regarding the subject matter of contract. The contract is void. X, a Delhi merchant, native of Delhi, enter into contact with Y, a Jabalpur merchant, for the purchase of 50 quintals of Sitafal. The Delhi Sitafal is a vegetable, while Jabalpur it is a fruit. The contract is void on the account of mutual mistake as the meaning of the Sitafal. Consider the following statement. Consent obtained by mistake render an agreement void if it is a mistake of the fact by both parties on the contract. In order to render a contract void, the ground of mistake and the mistake may be of the fact, not a law. An agreement would be if both contracting parties believe in existence of subject matter which did not exist. Void. Two parties enter into contract. They later realize that the law understood is applicable was not forced in India. The maker their contract is none of the above. What is the position of contract when it is being caused by mistake of fact, not voidable? What will be the effect of mistake of the law enforced in India on the agreement, not voidable? Two parties enter into contract. They later realize that they were mistake in their understanding that law is applicable in India. This makes their contract none of the above. A contract is caused by mistake of law is not enforced in India, has the same effect as through it is caused by mistake of fact. An agreement in restraint of the trade is void. A contract induced by mistake of law is void contract. Simrat and Sarthak make a contract grounded that enormous belief that particular date is barred by the Indian limitation. Simrat and Sarthak make a contract grounded on the enormous belief that particular date is barred by the Indian law of limitation. The contract is neither void nor voidable. Which one of the following statement is incorrect? C is incorrect. Which one is correct? The liability of the surety of coextensive with the principal debtor unless and otherwise provided in contract. A contract is not voidable because it was caused by the mistake to the law enforced in India. A makes a fact which is essential to the agreement is void. Which one of the following does not visit free consent under the provision of Contract Act? Mistake of law enforced in India. What is excusable under Indian Contract Act? A mistake of foreign law. A and B enter into the agreement, induce a mistaken view as to the foreign law. The agreement is void. Due to the mistake of foreign law, a contract became void where one of the parties is under the mistake of the matter of fact, the contract is valid. A consideration is unlawful both if the opposed to public policy, if it is immoral. An agreement is void if it is object consideration is forbidden by law, of which nature that if permit it would defeat the provision of law or is fraudulent. The court regarded it is immoral or against the public policy. B is a wife of A. A during the lifetime B make her consent an agreement with C to marry she. The agreement is void. A agreed to pay B, a teacher of 15,000 if B pass his son in the examination. B does so, but A refused to pay the money. In this case, which one of the following give a correct position of the agreement? The agreement is void because the object is unlawful and forbidden by law. Unlawful consideration and object have made a mention under which section of the Indian Contract Act 1872 under section 23. A promises to obtain for B an employment in the public service and B promised to pay 1000 to A. The agreement is void. X promises Y to drop a prosecution which he has instituted against Y. For the robbery of Y, promises to restore the value of things taken. Which one of the following is correct answer? The agreement is void as an object is unlawful. An agreement is void if the object is considered is forbidden by law of some nature that it permit it to be defeat the provision of law and fraudulent. Contract forbidden by law is void, illegal. Which one of the following is correct as per section 23 of Indian Contract Act 1872 is considered of an agreement of unlawful unless it is forbidden by law. Ajay grant a lease of the premises of Vijay for 1 year for the month rent of 5,000, knowing that the premises will be used in the prosecution. The lease is void. A married a woman agreed to live in the adultery with B and also agreed to serve him as a housekeeper. In return, B agreed to pay 500 rupees per month for living in adultery and 500 for housekeeping. The agreement is void as to the first object and valid with respect of the second part. A agreed to pay 1000 to B for his giving evidence of the suit, evidence in civil suit. The contract is void being opposed of the public policy. Which one of the following statement is correct? Illegal agreements are always void. Illegality renders contract void. An agreement is void if its object is unlawful. Every agreement is one which object is considered to be unlawful, void. If only a part of consideration and object is unlawful, the contract under section 24 is void. If only a part of consideration or object is unlawful, the contract under section 24 Indian Contract Act 1872 shall be void as a whole. In case of alternate promise, one branch of which illegal, one branch is legal, the other is illegal, legal branch alone can be enforced. The plaintiff see the defendant said filing from the pond, he saved the child. Later on, defendant promised to pay plaintiff 1000 rupees as a reward. In this context, which one of the following proposition is correct? The defendant is liable to pay because the agreement is not nudum pactum. A promises to pay the whole in a part or debt on which creditor might have enforced the payment. But for the law for the limitation of suit contract, if it is made by writing and signed by the person who charged therewith, an agreement to pay 1000 rupees to be without consideration, this agreement is void. An agreement made without consideration is void. As a general rule, the agreement made without the consideration is void. A contract without the consideration be void. A contract without consideration is void. There is exception of it. Which one of the following exception is correct? Natural and affection. Which one of the following prescribed by the maxim id dignito pactum not non etude exo? Doctrine of consideration. X purchased a deep freezer. As a offer of free iron box was given a gift along with the purchaser. The iron box did not work properly and burnt X expensive coat. Can X claim a damage asking the replacement of the iron box? No. He cannot ask. Any iron box was given to him free, hence there is no consideration. Consider the following statement. Point out which one of them is correct. An agreement made without consideration is void. Consideration should have some value in the eye of the law. The mother owed a rupees 10,000 to her daughter, but the Limitation Act has barred his debt. The mother signed a written promise to pay 3,000 on the account of debt. In this case, which one of the following is correct? This is enforceable against the mother because such promise is valid and binding under the Contract Act. An agreement in restraint of marriage is void. An agreement to remain unmarried is void. An agreement to restrain of the marriage of a person other than the minor is void. An agreement is void if its object is unlawful. A enter into contract with B to marry her. Can a contract be specifically enforceable? No. An agreement in the restraint of marriage of any person other than a minor is void contract. Every agreement in the restraint of the marriage is any person other than a minor is void. An agreement in restraint of marriage is expressly void. A contract the employment by or against an employer cannot be specifically enforceable. An agreement in restraint of marriage is a void. An agreement which stipulated that promisor will not marry other lady than the promisee is void. Under Section 27 of Indian Contract Act 1872, in which one of the following relation as the agreement in the restraint of trade is valid? Sale of goodwill. P, a wholesale dealer in a sugar, sells sugar Q with the condition that Q shall not sell the sugar beyond 1 kilometer of P go down. The agreement is in the restraint of trade thus void. An agreement in the restraint of trade under Section 27 of Indian Contract Act 1872 is void. An agreement in restraint of trade is void as to extent of such restraint. Which one of the following is not an agreement in restraint of trade? A, sell his goodwill of his business with agreement not carry on the similar business with a specified local limit as long as the buyer carry the similar business. A, sell the goodwill of business with the agreement not practices the same trade for section 25 year. If only a part of consideration or the object is unlawful, the contract under section 24 of the Contract Act shall be void as whole. An agreement for which one restrained from existing the lawful profession, trade, or business any kind is to that extent is void. Under section 28 of Indian Contract Act, an agreement not to pursue any legal remedy enforceable right is void. Which section of the Indian Contract Act 1872 deal with the agreement restraining the legal proceeding? Section 28. P. A wholesale dealer in sugar enter into contract with Q that he would not sell sugar beyond the radius of 1 mile of the good work. An agreement being restrained of the trade is void. Contract Act give the correct response. A promises B to drop a prosecution which he has instituted against B for robbery, and B promised to restore the value of thing taken. The agreement is void and its object is unlawful because it would defeat the provision of law. Section 28 of Indian Contract Act declared the void agreement is restrain the legal proceeding. An agreement not to raise a plea of limitation is void. An agreement, the meaning of which is not certain and not capable of certain, is void. An agreement, the meaning of which is not certain, is void. An agreement, the meaning of which is not certain, is void. The which section of the Contract Act make the agreement, the meaning of which certain or capable being made certain is void? Section 29. In Indian law, wagering contract will be treated as valid. An agreement in the connection with horse racing under section 30 is valid. An agreement by which the wagering under section 30 is void. Wagering agreements are void and not enforceable by law. Under Indian Contract Act, contract of betting is void. Wagering agreement is void and not enforceable. The nature of wagering agreement was explained in Dairy versus Plick. Wagering agreements are void. An agreement by way of wager is void.